Welcome back to another episode of LegalEase. I'm Adam Afif. I'm a legal draftsperson at the Attorney General's office. I'm here today with Miss Donna Muganhiri, our assistant principal legal draftsperson. So, Donna, please introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a bit about your background and what it is you do.
Thank you so much, Adam. My name is Donna Muganhiri. I am originally from Zimbabwe. I'm a legislative draftsperson with the Attorney General's office. I can say I've been drafting for 15 years. In the greater part of my career, I practiced in Zimbabwe. I was with the Attorney General's office as well in Zimbabwe with the Legislative Drafting Department.
Okay, and what does legislative drafting entail on a day-to-day basis? Try and say that in a form that maybe the public can understand.
Okay, so basically, legislative drafting is the translation of government policy into law. So this means that the Department of Legislative Drafting in the Attorney General's office is literally the intermediary between the translation of that policy of government into a draft piece of legislation that the legislature then debates on in order to pass it into law.
Okay, and what does that process look like from, let's say, someone says, I have an idea for a law. How do you go from that idea to finally making it law?
Okay, so firstly, there's two types of legislation that we speak of. We are speaking of an act of the National Assembly, or we are speaking of a statutory instrument. For the act of the National Assembly, the process starts with the ministry first seeking cabinet approval. When they get cabinet approval, part of the approval also entails getting approval to send drafting instructions to the Attorney General's office. So when we then receive those instructions, we act as the support in coming up with a draft piece of legislation that the same ministry then submits to National Assembly for consideration. The National Assembly then debates on that piece of legislation, and then if it's approved and agreed upon by the National Assembly, it is then submitted to the President for his assent. When it is assented to, that is when it becomes law.
And you mentioned something called statutory instruments. So can you tell us what is the difference between an act and a statutory instrument?
Okay, so an act of parliament basically is primary legislation, and then a statutory instrument is subsidiary legislation. So when I say this, I mean that the act is the parent piece of legislation, which is then approved by the National Assembly. The National Assembly then puts a delegation power within that piece of legislation to allow for the executive to be able to make implementing laws that allow for the implementation of that act of parliament. For example, if we have an act of parliament that creates a regulatory body, that regulatory body might be empowered to license, for example, certain individuals or businesses. And the minister is then empowered to make subsidiary legislation in terms of the process of licensing. How do you license? Where do you submit your applications and things like that?
Okay, and you mentioned something called the cabinet. So, what is the importance of the cabinet, and what role does the cabinet serve in making laws?
Okay, the cabinet is representative of the government. So it is the government that is making the policy, which would be cabinet. So whenever a minister is expected to submit policy to cabinet, it is expected to align with government policy and the government possession. So this therefore means that the main role of cabinet in this process is to approve or not approve the proposal that would have come through that's supposed to then go to National Assembly.
Okay, and what do you need to do to become a legislative drafter, or what skills or characteristics do you think are required to do what it is you do?
Thank you for that question, Adam. So, firstly, one would need to have a law degree. That's the first one. And because legislative drafting is a very specialized skill, a person would also need training in that particular area. So there are various kinds of trainings out there. You can study a certificate in legislative drafting. There are various institutions that offer that. There's also diploma level training and also master's level training for that.
Okay, and what is it that you find difficult or challenging about legislative drafting? What are some of the obstacles that you have to overcome?
Okay, when it comes to legislative drafting, I think the biggest challenge is you don't usually know what the next job is about. And I say this because until instructions are on your table, you definitely actually don't know. It can be a water bill today. Tomorrow, it can be money laundering legislation. The day after that, it can be something focused on fighting corruption. So at any point in this career, you need to be switched on and doing your research. And I guess that's also like part of the good part of the job.
So it seems like you would have to be kind of aware about a lot of different fields, even though you don't necessarily have technical expertise in them. But is there a way that you can specialize in anything? Are you specialized in anything, for example?
Yes, actually, I my areas of specialization at the moment um, are anti-money laundering laws and environmental law. I've also done a bit of work in anti-corruption, and I've done a lot of work on radiation protection as well.
Okay. And what are some of the things that you love about your job and that you look forward to coming to work?
Strangely, part of the challenge is also part of what I like about the job. Research makes you learn a lot of things. And after you realize this, after having experienced a lot of years on the job, that by the time you've gone through 5 years, you realize you'll know a lot. Whether your first job was drafting environmental protection laws, by the time you are 5 years into the job and then government is proposing something that might be related to that environmental law, you already know it from the top of your head. So by the end, you do 10 years, 15 years where I am, you realize it makes you be aware of a lot of things. It makes you be aware of even the international conventions and agreements that are in place that are also part of our compliance strategies as countries.
Okay. And lastly, Donna, I'd just like to ask, what advice do you have to any prospective legislative drafters out there?
I would say the job is taxing, but the job is really good. So, to any aspirants, I would encourage you to work hard, focus on your goals, and find yourself at the Attorney General's office, Legislative Drafting Department in particular.
All right. Thank you so much, Donna, for everything that you've said today. I think was really informative. And with that, I think we will sign off and we'll see you on the next episode of LegalEase.
Thank you, Adam.